So, Dr. Nicole Haggard, let me just tell folks who you are and welcome the series, welcome everyone to the series, I should say. This is the Matrix, Conversations and Transformations, a seminar series from the Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice. I'm Professor Caroline Heldman, the chair of the CTSJ department, and I am joined by co-organizer, Professor Malik Mozam Dulat. Hello.
Hey, everybody.
Also, Professor Christinakis is a co-founder of this series. She will not be with us today, but I know a lot of you are taking these recorded sessions and are watching them later. So lots of opportunity if you can't be here in person. So about the series, we focus on pressing current events, and our goal is to connect our community with experts and scholars and artists and activists who are changing the world. This is part of our Black Women in Hollywood series. As always, you can find us at oxy.edu matrix and on Instagram at CTSJ Oxy. Our previous shows are available on the YouTube site as well as our website. So keep that in mind, again, in case you want to go back and anything you may have missed, you can find it right there. So Dr. Nicole Haggard is an award-winning instructor, speaker, and published researcher. She has 16 years of work contextualizing the intersection of race and gender in American culture. Dr. Nicole is also a faculty member in the Film, Media, and Social Justice program at Mount St. Mary's and the Director of Communications for the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media at Mount St. Mary's. In 2018, Dr. Nicole co-founded CME, which is the Center for Intersectional Media and Entertainment. It's an organization that has fresh solutions to Hollywood's diversity issues. So if you are in the industry, it's an invaluable name to know, CIME, CME, in terms of training and content and everything you need to know to get your content producers on track. In addition to her speaking and writing, she's a featured expert for outlets like Variety, Glamour, and NBC. And Dr. Nicole is currently completing her forthcoming book called Race, Sex, and Hollywood, which is due out in 2020. Welcome, Dr. Nicole, and welcome, Whitney Davis. Let me do your intro as well.
Yay!
Hi, Whitney. Whitney Davis began her career at CBS over 13 years ago as a page and worked her way up from digital journalism and associate producer for CBS News to an entertainment executive working in diversity and inclusion at the network. Davis was part of a team charged with educating and fostering a more inclusive culture while identifying new voices both in front of and behind the camera. Disillusioned with a corporate culture that was unwilling to change, Davis actually resigned, a decision she's chronicled in an open letter that was published in Variety last year. I know many of you have read that letter. Davis is a proud wife and mother of twins and a baby girl, and she has found herself lending her voice to a movement that transcends race and gender in an effort to inspire a new generation of storytellers while shaping the landscape of an evolving and ever improving, hopefully, media entertainment industry. So with no further ado, Dr. Nicole is going to host Whitney Davis, and we are better for it.
Yay. Hi, Whitney.
Hey, Doc. Hi, Nicole. Hi, baby. That's my nephew, y'all.
So before
I got to go get my baby.
Yeah, get your baby, and I'll tell them why we are in conversation with each other. So the amazing Whitney and I met actually through her program at CBS, and I wanted to have my students experience the CBS on Tour program that the Entertainment Diversity and Inclusion program at CBS offers to come and talk to students, and that's how we first met. And I was so inspired by her desire to like bring up the next generation in a new way, right? And we really bonded in that understanding kind of what was going on and what needed to change. And so we also both were nominated for a program called 50 Women Changing the World in Media and Entertainment. And so our relationship grew even further then. And so out of that, you know, really came this strength for both of us to be leaders in understanding what's going on with DEI in Hollywood and why it's not working and what needs to be different and changed. So I wanted for us to have that sort of deeper conversation of what it takes as a human, right, to see that something's going wrong in a society, and especially in the industry that you're working in, and how do you muster the strength to stand up, you know, for what you believe in, and also worry about your career, right? Like all of these different elements are in play. But first, how do you like get to be that person in the first place who sees things differently, right? At CB, we're all about what do you see, you know? So can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to CBS in the first place, right? And sort of how you came up seeing things differently in the industry.
Sure. So I'm a Wichita, Kansas, born and bred. No Dorothy jokes, please. I've heard them all. But you know, for me, I at 18 went on this like life journey, and I was like, I don't think I'm gonna go to college right now. Even though that was fully the expectation, I decided to like pack up a black trash bag full of clothes and like pretty much ran away and got married. I've now, like, you know how people call it like a gap year? I call it my trap year. Because it was like, it was ratchet, but it was really defining in terms of really finding out the stuff that I'm made of, right? And it was crucially important for me in finding that strength, even though I wouldn't tap into it for like 20 years. It was really important as far as the journey went. After being in that situation for far too long, I moved back home. I originally wanted to be a doctor. Once I had gone through kind of that life experience, I knew that was not something I wanted to do. Always being like in love with stories and watching TV. I was just talking about how every Sunday when we would get the Sunday paper, I would get like the TV guide.
Yes.
And like go through the TV guide and be like, okay, this is what I'm watching this week, and like read up on the movies and the TV shows. So I think, you know, this was always in my purpose. But I started like habitually watching news around this time because it was, you know, right after 9/11, and I have a Marine story, which is for another panel, another conversation.
Yes, that
But I
amazing story.
I really felt like I had to keep my eye and pulse on what was going on in the world. And I was like, oh, why don't I think about going into journalism? So that's how I got into media. I ended up interning at CBS my junior year in college. Knew I didn't want to stay in Kansas. Packed up my like Tudor Honda after graduating. I got through school in like 2.5, 3 years. Because once I had came out of this like really wild, crazy, fast-paced life I was living, I was like, oh, college is way easier than like trying to figure out how to survive like the drug business. And so I went to school really quick, got out, moved to New York, got hired by CBS. And, you know, when I was an intern, I knew, and this is, I feel like, good career advice for college students who are in the internship, while you're navigating, you know, personalities and trying to manage up and create those connections, it's really important for you to also like reach out to the person that's working the job that you would most likely have after leaving college if you were to be hired at the place where you're interning. For me, that was like the position of the person who was like getting the coffee, you know, pulling tape for producers. So I made it a purpose that summer to learn that job. And so when I moved back to New York and got hired like 2 weeks later, I already had the skill set of like being that like lowest man on the totem pole, which really worked for me. And then from there, I like built a career, basically kind of like being the go-to person for everything no one else wanted to do. I find that that is oftentimes in, you know, these corporate environments, especially media, when you're talking about people of color, and me specifically being a Black person, I knew that like I'm going to get the grunt work. and there's only one or two other person that looks like me in the newsroom, so I should be really grateful to be here. And I was really aware of like the toxic kind of work environment pretty early on, because it was me and another Black girl, and they could not keep our names straight. And, you know, at 23, looking back now 14 years later, I should have been like, guys, like, let's be respectful here and at least give us the dignity of like knowing our names and keeping it straight. But I didn't know how to navigate that space. And so all of our colleagues thought it was funny. Instead of trying to remember our names, they were like, oh, let's just mash both names together. And so for the like 2.5 years that we were both there before I moved on, they called us Weedra, which was short for Whitney and Deidre. And everyone thought it was hysterical. And, that was just like the entry into that world for me. And the microaggressions eventually progressed and became like, okay, this is like overt racism here, people. But still, like, I didn't trust the system. I felt like my livelihood would be at risk if I spoke out. And so, I went back to what my dad taught us growing up, which was like cream rises to the top. Keep your head down, you work hard, you've got this good job. I'm from Kansas, living and working in New York, which eventually turned into, okay, now I'm the only Black woman who was like getting sent out by the network to cover story, to cover breaking news. Like, you should be happy, even though I was getting like the shitty assignments no one else wanted. But still like progressing in my career, but only at the level that they thought I was deserving of. Yeah. Eventually coming out to LA with no intention of getting into the entertainment side of business. I went into work on the news bureau here, and worked for a woman of color, which was a completely different experience, where, I remember something happened and I was really upset and I started crying in her office. And the conversation and the pep talk I got from her was like, don't ever let them see you cry. If you need to cry, you go into your office, you shut the door, you go in the bathroom, but you never show your emotions. You only show your strength. You got to have thicker skin, like all these things that we hear as women.
Yeah.
And I also think that can be harmful in the journey, because, our emotions and how we express ourselves, whether it's our anger, our hurt, we need to be free to process things the way that we need to process them. Without being ashamed and having to like go, I'm not saying like walk around crying all the time.
Yeah.
But I think the message of like, you need to have thicker skin, like, no, I don't. Y'all need to like have some damn respect here.
And having that thicker skin then be thrown in your face too. Like now you're angry and all of that kind of stuff too.
Absolutely. So that was kind of like my journey, my experience, microaggressions, but also like, being blessed and having mentors in my career, and the fact that I was able to make this transition from news to entertainment, which a lot of people are not able to do, and get into this executive training program that was created by the then chairwoman and president of CBS Entertainment, Nina Tassler, was like a really big deal. It was a corporate-wide initiative. I was, again, one of three. It's like a theme throughout my career. One of three selected to go through this program, and the purpose was to be placed in a creative position, because in news, I was like no longer in love with the type of story I was telling, because, news is not at all creative. And, the type of stories I was covering was like rush to the airport, get to Tucson, Arizona, be the first person on the ground, Gabrielle Giffords is shot, go knock on the door of victims. It was just like doom and gloom, hustle, bustle. And for whatever reason, I always found myself in like these little towns and cities where they didn't have Black hair care products. And I was just like, I can't even be about this life, because you didn't know when you were going back home. And so I knew that it was time for me to start looking.
Yeah.
And so I was grateful to be able to make that transition. And it was a 2-year program, almost like a medical residency. And the promise or the goal was a creative position at the end. But, in hindsight, looking back, I shouldn't have been surprised that I ended up in diversity and inclusion, because there was no one that looked like me in a creative role. Right. There were no Black creatives. There still are no Black creatives at the network.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I would have thought that like they were going to break ground with me. And like,
as they told you so.
Truth.
Yeah.
But they put me in diversity and inclusion, which, look, I'm grateful that they did, to the extent that one, I would have never met you, right? And I also would not have met some really incredibly talented individuals from communities that have historically been left out of the business of storytelling, right?
Yeah.
And being able to like authentically tell whatever stories they've wanted to tell. And so it was great in that respect. I was able to try, make it as creative as I could. But it was also really frustrating when I would meet, a really talented writer, a director, performer that I would try to introduce to my white colleagues, where they're like, yeah, I'm not really responding to their material. And it's like, well, yeah, of course you're not, because you don't know anything about that life.
Yeah.
Or, your community is not reflective of the stories that they're telling, but that doesn't mean that there's not value there.
Yeah.
So it just became like this increasingly really frustrating place for me to be professionally. And then after I became a mom, as I know, holding your precious baby, like, you take those glasses off and you start to see the world through like this new perspective and empathy, and you walk into like this power, you tap into this power you didn't know you had.
Yeah.
Because now you're thinking about legacy.
Yeah.
Now you're thinking about, what kind of world am I leaving for my child?
Yeah.
What kind of world am I leaving for other kids? And so
let's pause right there, because the thing that I like, what I love about this particular moment for you, right, is it's that shift. And I think when we're in it, and you mentioned it a couple times, right? Like, there's two people that look like me. There's 3 people. There's no one in those positions, right? And we get caught up in the numbers. And even when the reports come out and they're all about the numbers, right? But what you kept going back to is like, how does it feel to be a person walking into these rooms, and how you've been taught to navigate them versus this shift that happens for you? You know what I mean? On like, it's like a spiritual warfare as well. And how do you recover from that? Right. So I love this moment for you of this break that then is this sort of epiphany of like, wait, what are we really doing here? Right. Like, why does this work actually matter?
And for me, it was like, why does this work actually matter if I'm not able to create change that I was brought in here to create?
Yeah.
And so I started to think like, why am I here? Like, is it for the it's the optic that this company actually cares about doing this work.
Right.
But if you actually cared about doing the work, then I wouldn't have to try to convince you to sit down with a future Shonda Rhimes, or like, even if they're not there, to just like make some, like, we're in the business of meeting people. Like, that's what Hollywood is. It's relationship. Of course you have to have talent, but really it's about how have you been able to navigate your career in a really smart way in the relationships that you've created.
Yeah.
And not always about on the page or what's on the reel.
Yeah. And I think especially for students out there who are doing like critical theory, right? Like, what you were taught was, let me bring them the comps, right? Let me show you that this audience is missing, or this and this and this. But it wasn't until you shared your actual personal narrative around this that people really get it, you know. And storytelling and narrative are at the center of critical race theory. And this is why, you know, like, we can talk about the problems with DEI on screen and off screen all day long, but if we're only talking about the numbers and not talking about what's actually happening for people in these spaces, like, how do we actually execute change, right? And I think that's why your letter just shook so many people on both sides of this spectrum. So can you talk a little bit about getting to the point of writing the letter and then the aftermath of that?
Yeah. So for writing the letter, it was, at first it was kind of like one of those things where I was like I wouldn't call it litigation, but like I had engaged an attorney, and I was like, you know, it was almost like I had been there for so long. I had this workplace trauma, and I wasn't using it as leverage, but it was like in the back of my mind, like, if they don't want to like come with some reparations, then I'm getting ready to be out there talking. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, like, that was like how the whole idea of writing my journey began, because I was thinking about reparations for me.
Yeah.
But then it turned into like, how can I turn this into reparations for everybody?
Everybody, right? This is bigger
and a reckoning.
than this. Yeah.
How can this be like a reckoning for, you know, bringing attention to like what's going on in the industry? And even though it was very much about my work experience, it was a community shared experience, specifically for Black people, because I can only talk about my experience, right? As a Black woman, but it's something across the board for community, you know, marginalized communities, in terms of like the lack of access and opportunity and what we deal with in corporate America, but for sure within the industry. And so my motivation was, one, like, legacy. What am I leaving for my kids? Because it came down to, if this is not good enough for my children, then it definitely shouldn't be good enough for me.
Yeah.
And setting that example for them. But then I started thinking about like the next Whitney that would go through that journey. And also looking back on the people who came before me that didn't have the opportunity that I had to speak their truth as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, my hope, my prayer was that in me speaking up and like sharing my experience, that more people would feel encouraged to do the same thing, to say like, actually, what she's describing, I am going through that right now in my place of work, or I experienced that and I left the industry. Because there were so many people, so many contemporaries that I had that like had the same exact experience and left the industry, period. Like, so much trauma that they were like, I can't even work in entertainment, or I can't even work in news anymore. And so it was almost like my love letter to them as well.
And
To
since
just
we're
say
all
like, I
missing out,
see you.
and we're
I
missing
see
out
you. I hear you.
out.
And so like, it was scary, but it was also like, for me, it was most scary because I was worried about what my parents would think. It wasn't really scary as like, is this going to end my career? Am I going to be blacklisted? Because I was like, I don't want to work in this system any longer.
Yeah.
I don't want to work in a place where I feel like I'm invisible, and that I don't have a voice. And so for me, it was like, how upset are my parents going to be? Because they're from that generation. Like I just told you, like, my dad is like, you keep your head down, you work hard. You know, you can't, as a Black person, you know, you oh gosh, I'm like blanking on all the things that he would say, right? You know, you gotta make sure that there's like some sugar, right?
Yeah.
So that they're able to like swallow it. But you know what? When I shared the letter with my parents, they were like really proud. And once I knew that I had their blessing, I was like,
Good. Yeah.
Go with God. But I honestly didn't know that it would have like the reach that it had. I didn't know that I was like kind of the only person at the time that had called out like a network in the way that I did. Like I didn't understand any of that, like the
Yeah.
gravity of it all. I knew it was a pretty big deal when I saw that, like, oh shit, they let the head of casting go, who I, spoke about. And not that they let them go because of the letter, but I think that they started to do like some soul searching.
Mm.
And I think that continues to this day. I think that, even though my goal over a year ago was like that people would start sharing their own stories, even though we had to go through a terrible like summer of
Mm.
seeing Black bodies lynched, literally lynched.
Literally.
We're in the midst of a pandemic. We are like, there's just so much going on. I feel like we're like, everything is boiling over, right? And we're now in this like season of people saying, enough.
Yeah.
We're not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
We cannot, once we come out of like this dark place, we cannot go back to business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really exciting place to be for people like us who do the work that we do.
Yeah. And the thing that struck, and I think the thing that you're actually resonating with how the movement went, and you were ahead of the curve on this, was you literally said they have a white problem, right? You weren't like, it's a diversity and inclusion problem, they have a people of color, like you didn't do a BIPOC. It was like, no, there's a white problem, right? And I think that has also been the difference in the shift, is like white folks waking up to what is my role in this, and that we actually need more of an anti-white supremacy lens when we are talking about DEI work.
Girl.
And that was, to me, that was like that was the title. I was like, yes, here we go.
Yeah,
and
it dawned on me.
The ripple.
It dawned on me one day. I was like out in the back, like outside, just kind of going through the things and emotions I was going through, and I called variety. I was like, I think we should just call it like what it is. Like, this is not a Black problem. It's not a BIPOC problem. The responsibility to shift corporate culture that has never worked for us and like systemically like break it apart and rebuild the system. That's not us. That's not on us. That's on the white people. They built the system. They need to fix it. Right?
Yeah.
If you want us to participate, if you want to profit off of our stories, like if you want us to be a part of the change, you got to fix it.
Yeah. And you also got to make those spaces, you got to do your own work so that when you invite us back into the fold, it's not a dangerous space for me, like the stuff that you share in the letter. Like these are concrete examples of, sure, you're going to say you're going to hire people, but has your company done the work to actually make it an inclusive atmosphere?
Right. And you have to do the work and you have to hire the people. But, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, and especially in the new role that I have, for all of the naysayers who were like, you shouldn't write the letter, you may never work in the industry again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, 10 years later, I'm finally doing what I left news to do, which is really great.
So let's talk about that transition. You want to talk about that transition?
Yeah. I was, girl, I got mom brain. I'm like, I already lost thought. What was I gonna say? Oh, one thing I've been thinking about a lot in terms of like diversity initiatives and why I feel like they haven't been able to succeed in a way that they should to create real change is because all of these programs are always looking at that like bottom level of like, we need more interns of color, we need more staff writers, we need more directors who are trying to break from commercial into television to give them like their break.
Yeah.
Okay, you give them their break, you give them their first job, you give them the internship, but you're not promoting.
Yeah.
Right? You're not. And so it's like, how do we find people who are in their like the middle of their career, right? Yeah. And they're constantly getting like pushed aside for promotion, and or not being able to advance in their career. How do you find the talent in that place to like promote to like these higher levels, these positions of power, where they're really able to like influence decision making? How do we like get these baby writers on a track of becoming a showrunner in 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah.
Because what's going on in the industry now is you have the talent, you definitely have the talent, but on paper, it's not there because they've been passed from show to show, not being promoted, and are still working at the staff writer level.
Yeah.
Because they come into the industry and they're free because like the program, sends them to the studio. Here's a free writer, whatever it may be. But then they're bounced around and they have, they're working on a show where they see the white writer's assistant, get bumped up ahead of them. 2 years later, they may still be working as a staff writer. And the white dude who was an assistant on the show that I worked on is now like a co-EP.
Yeah.
Or creating their own shows. And so it's how do we promote that mid-level? How are we creating that pipeline to like the future showrunner or the future executive producer or the future creative executive who's one day going to run the studio?
Yeah. Which requires the people who are in power making those decisions to do some work on themselves. Because even like Sundance came out with a study of looking at why we don't have more women directors, and it came down to they don't trust women with money. Right. So like, how does this unconscious bias stuff really impact the hiring? And then that's why it matters who's at the top levels making those decisions. And then thinking about even what you were talking about, how you have to squirm and shift and conceal yourself in order to make it through too. And who do you become by the time you were at the top? And that was the energy I got from you too, that you were like, I'm no longer willing to deform myself to get to that place.
Oh no. Yeah. I told a friend today actually I have a mentee that works in the industry that, has gone to HR a million times, Black woman. Every time a promotion opportunity comes up, I'm sitting with my managers. I'm trying to like show them what I've done, how I envision the job. I'm not getting it. I'm documenting, I'm sitting down with people, I'm talking to this person. I said, girl, it's time to go. Yeah. It's time to go. I said, because it's a cultural issue. So even if you do get the job, get the promotion, you're not going to want to stay there because you're going to be miserable because you're not going to be changing the culture. So we need to really start thinking about like the culture of these places and how do we change culture?
That's what CME's taken on, right? So we have like our new Hollywood White Supremacy and Me series that we're doing. Like, that's what we really recognize. You got to change the culture in these workplaces as a solution. And then now you're on the other side. You're on the change culture through content side. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and what you're excited about?
Yeah, for sure. So I started kind of like putting out into the universe and like, guys, I think I'm ready to get back to my ultimate goal of being a storyteller and wanting to create content. And for me, it's always about inclusion and representation and wanting to not just see myself, but see other people, right? To see those stories, hear those stories that we haven't had the chance to see and hear. And literally a few days after like speaking that into existence, I got a call like, hey, we just made a deal. My good friend is running drama development over at 20th. And she's like, hey, we just made a deal with an overall deal with this amazing, producer, director. Think it would be a great fit, Anthony Hemingway. And I'm like, Anthony Hemingway, like, wow, like, but am I right for it? And she's like, absolutely, just like sit down, have the meeting. We had we were on a Zoom call for like 2 hours. It was like a love fest, total vibe, not even a work kind of thing. I'm like, I don't even know if he read my resume. Like, it didn't even matter. It was just a whole damn vibe. And fast forward a few months, and I'm now the VP of Development and Production at Anthony Hemingway Productions. It's very cliche to say, like, I hit the ground running, but literally, like, this man has an amazing slate of projects. I've already brought in like 3 projects of my own that I'm passionate about, because the same relationships that I was able to establish with creatives in my previous role, where I wasn't necessarily able to like get them any traction on that side, I'm now able to like introduce to a brand that is solely set on changing the narratives of what it means to be Black in America, making sure that like inclusive storytelling, not just from the Black perspective, but the human, right, human experience, that there's a world for that. It's promoting authentic storytelling, creating opportunity for creatives who have historically not had the opportunity to tell their stories. And what I really love about Anthony and the type of work that he's in, story that he's interested in telling, is that like, if you're a baby writer and you have an idea and something to say that he sparks to, we will pair you with a supervisor, showrunner type to help you get your show to the finish line.
Yeah.
And so it's really challenging work.
Yeah.
In terms of like finding that caliber of talent that's authentic to the stories that we want to tell. But we're up for the challenge, right? And it's really exciting to just be in a place that is supportive of telling those stories.
Amazing.
That you know, like one of the projects that I brought on is an animated series that we're getting ready to pitch to Disney that features a trans 12-year-old girl.
Nice.
And no one cares that she's trans.
Imagine that.
Like, there's a world where, like, an animated world where there's a trans character and no one gives a shit that she's trans.
Yeah.
Like, those are the type of stories that I want to tell. I brought in another project where the lead and creator and writer has a disability. And as a viewer, you watch it and you don't walk away feeling like, this guy, I'm so inspired. Or this poor guy can't move his body.
Yeah.
He can't move his neck. You know, the inspiration point of it all. And you watch and you're like, you know, he's a little bit of a jerk. or like, you know, like tapping into the theme of like, while we may tell people like, be the best version of yourself or be more vulnerable, like we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So like exploring these really like relatable human themes, but through like the perspective that we've never been able to see them through.
Which is amazing. We're so lucky to have someone like you in that position, bringing these stories to the screen. I'm aware we only have a couple more minutes with you. I know Caroline jumped on. And there's a couple student questions.
I jumped on because there are questions. That's all.
Yeah. We could do, Nicole and I could do this all day. Like we'd be here until 5 o'clock still. But yeah, questions, ask away.
Baby days, I was going to be like, hello, I've gone through 3 feedings and
hey, sorry.
So Whitney, question from Mira for you. How do you balance assumptions of image and freeing emotion in a space that expects that and resists freedom of expression?
That's a deep question.
Lord. You know, I don't know if I'm going to answer this the right way, because I'm like, that's such a smart question and I'm just not that intelligent. But for me, like, I just try to navigate the world now as the truest form of myself, the truest version of myself. And I've learned that, like, if you don't accept who I really am and what I bring to the table, or what I bring to the project, or what I bring to the office, or what I'm bringing into the newsroom, then you're not worthy of of me being there. And I do think that you will find a place that will value you, right? I think going into, as a student, making the shift into wherever you end up professionally, you have to have these standards, right? You have to have like these non-negotiables going in, whether that's like, I'm not getting ready to let somebody not at least give me the dignity of knowing my name, or I'm not willing to sacrifice my integrity for my work, or I'm not willing to, whatever that may look like. I'm like going through my own non-negotiables. I think if you have those standards, then you will navigate those spaces in a way where you're allowed to express who you truly are.
And part of that is your journey and your own like self-discovery, especially when you're younger, is learning who that is for you. And that's what you came to too, right? And it's like, and then finally, when you were faced with this moment of, do I do this or not? It was you standing in your truest, authentic self that you had discovered, being scared of that person, right? Like, oh my God, if I put this all out here. And then I love that you talk about giving it to your parents, as this sort of like sounding board of, can I really be me? Is it okay to be me in the world? And then how amazingly freeing it was when you were out there as you fully authentically yourself. Yeah.
Like that Oprah gift where she's like,
yeah, right.
And you're absolutely right. It's a journey that you go on. It's a learning experience. I think, it's like, it's like the saying, like the only way you learn is from making mistakes. Like you're going to make them. And there's going to be some really like scary moments, but that's the only way that we grow and step into our power.
Another question, another great question, totally different kind of line of thinking. When you talk about breaking apart and rebuilding the system, do you think that a better corporate culture is possible under capitalism?
Oh.
Just a little question.
Yes, critical theory students.
Ooh, I'm like, wow. I mean, hell, I don't even know, right? Like, I feel like we're living in such like scary, weird times. Like, I don't even know what the system is going to look like next month or tomorrow. Capitalism aside, because I'm definitely not smart enough to even go into that. My brain is like, I do think that the only way the system can be, I think the only way we can break the system is rebuild it, is if we all do it together. And we all have to play a part of it. It can't just be like, all right, white people, go rebuild what you've already built, because they just gonna build it the same way, right? It's just gonna be built the same way with like the veneer of inclusion. So I think, not different from the discussions about how do we defund. I said on a call last night, I was like, we need to defund Hollywood too, I was like on this whole like, system of like power to the people. But yeah, I don't think you can rebuild it without having like inclusion be a part of the rebuilding of it. And I know it's really scary for white men and, the white women who have also benefited from working in the system, to think about the fact that like, if the system gets rebuilt, then I may not have a job. Well, you probably shouldn't be there anyways, some of you.
Yeah.
Because you're the problem. You're the problem. And for some of those gatekeepers who also may be people of color that have been afraid to use their power, sorry, but you probably shouldn't be there either. Because it's going to take like some bold architects to come up in there and knock shit down and rebuild it.
Yeah. I could give a whole lecture on this.
Okay, so Nicole, actually,
business and art. So yeah.
So my next question is actually for you to give that lecture in.
Okay.
But along these lines, so tell us a little bit about your book project, which is about the long history in Hollywood, right? But you're also addressing, you're also addressing like what can be done. And the bigger kind of context, I think, of Sarah's question is, strategies, right? Inside strategies, outside strategies. I mean, ultimately, it's a question about capitalism versus other forms, other economic systems. But in terms of us today in a capitalist system, like, what are some of those strategies? And if you could talk about that in the context of your book project.
Sure. Let's say bye to Whitney, though. She has to go.
Bye, Whitney.
Love you. Thank you so much for
I
joining
love
us.
you. I mean, reach out to me anytime. I'm sorry, I'm not as critical in my thinking.
This is what that's why we pair up and we all come together.
That's why I'm like, I come with the passion and the experience, but I'll leave the like deep thinking to y'all. But no, thank you so much for inviting me, and feel free to like share my information. I'd be happy to continue the conversation with any of your students.
Great. Thank you for your bravery.
Take care.
Laura Whitney. Amazing.
Thank you. Take care. Power to the people.
Bye.
Bye.
So, even she's brilliant, and, in that self-deprecating way, knowing, so at CME, this is the gap that we saw was happening, right? So like, there's 3 women who founded CME. I'm the super nerd, right? I'm the PhD. I'm a white woman. We have a Black woman who does like brand strategy. She's a media entrepreneur. She's really brilliant in this sort of way. She started in public relations. And then we have an Asian woman who is on her way to like run a studio. She's already a studio executive right now. So we come from these 3 different angles, right? And I think that is part of the beauty and the brilliance of it. We call it the 5 A's, that you actually need to bring together the artist, the academics, the activists, the audience, and the allies in the industry who already want to do this work, because Whitney has all the brilliant ideas for how to tell different sorts of stories, but she doesn't necessarily understand how the business side works and dismantling that, right? I bring all of this long history of perspective of what's been happening in Hollywood for so long. How did we get to that place to help dismantle it? So for me, it's intersectionality, right? And thinking about intersectionality in a broad way, beyond individuals, but also like, how do we intersect for solutions, right? And that intersectionality is actually the cure for humanity. Bringing all of these different perspectives is the thing that will let us topple systems and then rebuild them, right? And so often people just stay in their lanes without coming together. It wouldn't be like a natural idea for a Hollywood person to be like, oh, let me holler at a PhD in critical theory to figure out how we should fix this, right? But that is actually, I think, the way that we're going to fix this is by bringing these experts together, because Hollywood really is at this intersection of business and art, and it impacts society, which is a really unique place to be as a business, right? In the way that it tells stories that literally shape our lives. So my work really, my dissertation is called Race, Sex, and Hollywood. And where it really started from was me learning about the production code, which was the rules of what could and could not be in the movies from like the 20s to the 60s, basically. And one of those rules was that miscegenation, which they defined as sex relationships between the Black and white races, was forbidden. So initially, it's this idea that interracial relationships, specifically Black and white, can't be made into movies. At the end of the day, every other race and gender combination you could think of was made, except for specifically Black men and white women. And so my dissertation traces like the history of that and how sexual racism operates in our culture. But what I really learned from the miscegenation clause was that this is how they dealt with race. This is how Hollywood learned to do race, right? It's this separation of bodies on screen. And when you put bodies on screen, what spaces and places are they allowed to occupy? What sort of social relationships are they allowed to have together? And this rule that existed in Hollywood for over 30 years really established white supremacy on the screen. And by the time the civil rights movement was really brewing, Hollywood was super embarrassed that they had this rule in their rules, right? But they didn't deal with the ramifications of what they had done. And those people in power just continue to make the same assumptions about what we should put on screen and what will sell, right? So as those of you that are going into the industry, you'll hear this word comps. Comps is like comparing what you're making to how other things have done. And so you'll hear that over and over again, like the stories we tell are the stories that will sell. right? But how do you know what will sell? It's based on your assumptions of what will sell. So who's in power making those assumptions? But that's also directly connected to what has sold before. But if you don't realize that we had this long history of purposely censoring specific types of images being on screen, you don't realize that that's the reason why we don't have comps, not that these things just don't work, which is the logic that they will give you over and over again. So when you talk about capitalism, to me, it's really important to understand this, the way that these ideas and assumptions are baked into the system of the capitalism, right? And because Hollywood has always been warring between, are we an art? Are we a business? Are we an art? Are we a business, right? And like, do we impact society or are we just here to make money, right? And it's this thing where you'll hear someone like Whitney being like, no, I want to tell stories that will change the world, right? And then you'll hear somebody who's the head of a studio like, yeah, but that movie won't make any money. It's this really interesting space. So I love that you're bringing capitalism into the conversation because it's at the center of it for sure.
And do you think that Hollywood can be reformed as a, as a capital?
As it is, as a capital, I mean, that would have to like dismantle our entire society from, running off capitalism. Is it at the end of the day a project of selling something and you buy a ticket to go see something and, this exchange of goods? That's how it's set up now. Should it be? I mean, you're like blowing my mind on like a world in which capitalism wouldn't exist and Hollywood exists in that world. Then of course that would operate, right? We could do that. I think now though, thinking of yourself as an audience member with power, that you can vote with your money too, right? Like, have you ever thought of yourself as a conscious capitalist in Hollywood? A conscious consumer in Hollywood? We talk a lot about like voting with your remote, right? Especially now, since we're all at home doing nothing but streaming everything. Oh, that's what we forgot to ask Whitney, what we should be binge watching, right? Since we're all just doing a lot of that, are you thinking about what you're consuming, right? When Netflix is asking you, are you still watching? Are you conscious of the thing that you're still watching and that they are tallying what you are watching, right? So I even tell my students, like when you're in the shower, just put it on and let it go, right? Like, break the algorithm, let it know that this is the kind of stuff that we actually want. And when you're buying tickets to things, when you're subscribing to things, are you conscious? Even if it's not something that you want to watch over and over again, are you putting your money towards that thing? So you can be, as an audience member, part of that shift that happens. And the other way you can do it is by actually leaving reviews. The reviews matter as well. And as we all know from social media, the trolls are really excited and happy and haterade all over the place. So be an alternate voice in that sphere as people who leave reviews and comments on material that you want and you want more of.
So along those lines, and
yeah.
It's such good timing. I just received a text message maybe an hour ago from a friend who said, I'm currently watching a virtual panel with the makers of the film Black Boys. They have mentioned that their IMDb rating is now at 4 out of 10, and it looks like white men have been trying to sabotage the score according to the data on the site, trying to get the word out because it was a film that touched me, and I think it would be a great educational tool for all at showing the reality in America. So please, folks might not know that this happens, but when films come out, whether they're pushing against, patriarchy, heterosexism, racism, or a combination of, anytime you're doing systems of power work through documentary films or even through fictional entertainment, there are organized groups who will come after you and post reviews. So this is a long way of saying, folks, watch Black Boys, go to Black Boys and go to the IMDb page and post those positive reviews. And Nicole, maybe you have some other strategies too.
Yeah, the positive reviews are everything. And the other thing I want to say about the system is doing your inside and your outside work, right? So like, all of us live in a white supremacist society. What are we doing, especially white folks, what are we doing to realize how white supremacy lives within us and operates in ways that we don't even realize? Because those of us who are excited, white folks who are excited about doing DEI work, a lot of times we're the most dangerous people because we are in the most close quarters with the people that we're attempting to lift our whole society up with, right? If you haven't done your own inner work, you're actually doing damaging work to people on a daily basis that you don't even realize is going down, like the name thing that Whitney was saying, and so many other examples of how this operates in workplaces. So doing your inner work is so important, and then making sure you're doing the outer work too. We have various social institutions, so whatever social institution you have decided to go into because you have a calling to work in that area, it's your responsibility to work within that lane to dismantle white supremacy. And that's the outer work and figuring out what you can do. So if you are a content creator, then that looks like creating different stories, right? If you want to be an executive, then that looks like, how are you setting up the system, right? Are you consciously setting up the system in a different way? So really making sure that you have that balance of your inner work and your outer work to dismantle institutional racism in whatever lane you've chosen as your life's lane.
Great. We have about a minute left.
Okay.
Question though, student is asking, I would love to get involved in productions of shows like the ones that Whitney was talking about, with more diversity that we don't usually see, with more subversive stories.
Yeah.
Good place to start as a student and beyond.
So, you know, if you don't have I don't know what Oxy's internship connection program is with your film program, but, you know, internships are a great way. Be very particular at who you choose to get an internship with, right? Because Hollywood, as we know, is just like, we're throwing you to the wolves. And so if you want to actually learn to do this work, be very particular about who you choose, and make sure that that company is outwardly invested in doing something different, right? So like off the top of my head, I think of Wise Entertainment, and they have a really great internship program. Whitney's company, right? If you meet someone like Whitney, how Whitney was talking about, like, just holler at me. So often people will tell you, just hit me up, and you don't, because you're scared as a student, right? And all of that. Don't be scared. If people are offering that to you, go to them, because those are the kind of people that you want to lead you and train you. You don't want to just get a rando internship at Disney or sorry, I'm not going to like name a company, but for example, a big company, right? And you end up with somebody who actually doesn't have those non-negotiables, right, that Whitney was talking about. And that's the person that's training you. And now you are trained into the system in a way that isn't the way that you want to be trained. So make sure when somebody like Whitney is offering that to you, network your butt off, especially as a student. There is such a different energy from being a student to being somebody looking for a job, right? Something about that is a different energy. So when you come at somebody and you're like, I'm a student, the energy there is different. So utilize that status while you have it to make your connections. And in this virtual world, it's easier than it was before, right? You don't actually have to go to like these events. You can virtually, people will do stuff with you. So it's great.
Like you, thank you so much.
Yay.
From the hospital room.
Yes, you can hit up See Me too. We have a next generation program. And so we will, you know, get to know you and help funnel you in directions that make sense for you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
With your wonderful baby. Good luck with the sci-fi project.
Yeah.
Oh, sleep. That's a good sleep. I got loud and wake him up. Thank you both. And for people watching, thank you, Whitney Davis, for joining us. And we will put the contact information for See Me on the YouTube page when we post this video later tonight or tomorrow morning.
Awesome.
Thank you.
See Me Clearly. See Me, CIME, clearly. Hit us up. We are here for you.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.
You too.